It should pop up there. Brilliant. Okay, we're in business. Okay. Hi, thank all of you for joining us today. My name is Lindsay. I'm a master's student here at Bishop's University. I'd like to remind everyone that Bishop's University is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki people. Today, we are going to hear from Monica Waterhouse. She is going to tell us about art-based pedagogy in the context of language education. We will hear about a collaborative study undertaken with ESL and FSL teachers of newcomer students in Ontario and Quebec, and use that to explore the potential of art-based pedagogy for language teaching and learning. Together, we will be invited to reflect on our experiences with art-based approaches and to consider their feasibility and value in our own teaching context. Monica is currently the Director of ESL Teacher Education at Université Laval. She has over 20 years of language teaching experience. Her teaching focuses on various aspects of ESL pedagogy, and she is involved in practicum supervision in Quebec schools. Her recent research explores the potential of arts-based approaches in language education. This presentation should last around 30 minutes. During the presentation, please write your questions in the chat. After the presentation, we will take live questions. Please keep your mic off during the presentation. This meeting will be recorded. If you are uncomfortable with being recorded, please feel free to close your camera. Otherwise, we'd love to see your face. For anyone who doesn't mind, we love faces. The recording is for the website. If this is your first time with us, please be aware that you can see any previous webinars on the website because they've been recorded. Do you see how that works? So the For Real project aims to generate new ideas in thinking, doing, and being as teachers. The idea is to create resources for educators and teachers. All of this will be done through the website, and it can be found by simply typing in For Real into Google. Also, I will add the link into the chat as well in just a moment, so you'll have the link available. So with that, I am now going to be quiet and hand it all over to Monica.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for that lovely introduction. If you'll just give me a moment, I'll share my screen with you, or attempt to do so. So this may look like a bit of a bait and switch. Right now, you should be seeing my first slide, which is actually a press release. Are you seeing that? Yeah, it looks good. Thanks so much, Lindsay. So I've actually asked Lindsay to post this press release in the chat, and I wanted to welcome you to the webinar and start also with a land acknowledgement, because I am a white settler working here at Université Laval, and we are situated on the ancestral territories of the Huron-Wendat Nation, the Innu Nation, the Atikamekw Nation, the Maliseet Nation, and the Abenakis Nation. So land acknowledgements are certainly important, but I'm really interested in how we can take action for reconciliation, particularly as a language educator. And so I thought I'd take a moment to just draw your attention to this press release. If you're not aware about this critical issue that's facing First Nations in Quebec right now, Bill 96 came into force in June last year, which amends the Charter of French Language in Quebec, and the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec Labrador and also the First Nations Educational Council of Quebec have filed for a judicial review by the Superior Court of Quebec. About 14 articles in it that infringe on their constitutional rights to self-determination and to teach their children their ancestral languages. And for me, as someone who's in the business of propping up a colonial language, English, for me, it's really doubly important that we speak out against any potential marginalization of Indigenous languages. So I encourage you to learn more about this court action. The press release, if Lindsay is kind enough to repost the link, I can always do it at the end of the presentation as well. And to show your support and help out in whatever way you may be able to in this regard, and follow the story closely. So that's my start. I did promise to talk about arts-based pedagogies for language education, so I'm going to do that. both some potential and some problems that may arise in doing it. As a slight overview of what you can expect, I want to maybe talk about what arts-based pedagogy can look like in the classroom, as giving you specific examples from the arts-based pedagogical project that I did with teachers of newcomers. So Lindsay gave you a little snapshot of that. And as we go through, I'll ask you to sort of reflect on your own arts-based pedagogies, whether you think you have them or not, and to think a bit about whether it's something you want to do or not in the context of your own teaching context. This lovely piece of art you get to see here, it's also behind me, but I thought I'd put it on the slide, was actually created by one of my master's students as a way. She created totems that were associated with it was a teaching methods class. So she created a totem that she felt represented the role of the teacher in each one of the different teaching methods. And so for her, instead of doing a final essay for her master's, this art piece became her way of expressing that understanding. And so for a long time, I've been inspired by my students, and I love working with teachers to explore this further. So my first question for you to maybe reflect on, and in the interest of sticking to the time frame requested, I'll probably not take too many comments, but you're welcome to add something to the chat, is what you think of or what comes to mind when you think of arts-based pedagogy, and whether it's something you think you currently do yourself. So to begin, here I'm drawing on Lastra's thesis. It's a really nice overview of different arts-based pedagogies in education, in language education. And the literary arts are probably already part of your practice. If we look at creative writing, poetry, stories, these are a common practice in education. And of course, there are other kinds of writing that have to go on, argumentative texts, and that kind of thing that we do for the ministry exams if you're working in the K-12 system. But nonetheless, involving creative writing is a part of what many of us incorporate in our teaching. So this doesn't probably come as a surprise. It's a natural fit with writing. Closely associated with that are visual arts and now perhaps digital arts as well, where we start to illustrate our stories and augment our creative writing with images, drawing, painting, and so on. But of course, the visual arts can move into sculpture as well. And many of these things now, with technology being front and center in the Quebec education program, we look at things like multimodal storybook making, and even filmmaking is so easy now. We have so many apps, and every smartphone is a digital camera. So these all become very feasible multimodal practices that are very common to find in schools. And last but not least, the performing arts. Now here, maybe you might think, oh, well, we don't really dance or do drama in my language classroom, but even something as simple as a role play or an improvisation is a form of dramatic expression. And music and song have always formed a very strong underpinning of language teaching. I know my colleague Trevor Gulliver out there, he does a whole thing at Speak on that. So music is also a way to engage with arts-based pedagogy. And for our youngest learners, music is at the core of the Cycle 1 curriculum in Quebec. So these are all very common. However, one of the things that I find is a bit intimidating about going a bit further with arts-based practices is the idea that you're not an artist or you don't have talent. So I love this quote from Martin, who says, it doesn't have anything to do with talent. I don't know if I go that far. A little bit of artistic talent is nice, but not being an artist shouldn't be a barrier to arts-based pedagogies. So full disclosure, I don't have art skills. I draw stick men, and generally speaking, this is not my forte, but that doesn't mean I can't explore arts-based methods with my students. And it really, according to Martin, really is just about being open to trying something new and using different ways to convey meaning. The other thing I like to reassure people about when we talk about arts-based pedagogy, we usually focus on producing artworks, but arts-based pedagogy can also be about engaging with and responding to arts-based texts. So listening to music, thinking about music that you're listening to, not necessarily creating it, could be a form of arts-based pedagogy. So I'm hoping by this point, you've probably realized that to some degree or another, you're doing arts-based pedagogies at times in your class, but how could you push them further, and what are the benefits that we can realize by working with arts-based pedagogies? So here I'm drawing on Maxine Green. She's a very dear educational philosopher who for a long time was a big proponent of the arts and literature, because for her, the arts are the ways we connect our hearts and our minds. It makes our learning, our thinking, our cognition deeply embedded in our imaginations and our emotions, and there are reciprocal effects between thinking and feeling. So she's a philosopher. We'll look at what this looks like in practice as well. Oh, yes. And Elliot Eisner is an American arts-based educator, very well known. And what I have here on the slide is part of the reason I was really excited to try this with immigrant language learners, with newcomers, because he talks about how art can be a way we make sense of our world, think about new possibilities, um, dealing with uncertainty, and exploring our own interior landscape. And all of these things were particularly important for newcomers integrating into their new home, be it in Quebec or Ontario. And arguably, if you think about our young learners in secondary, this is a time where they're also trying to make sense of who they are, and arts are a way for us to do that. Finally, I want to go back to Lastra, who I think sums it up so nicely. He says, arts are a language. And so when we have our students in second language education that are maybe struggling to express themselves in the target language, arts can be a way to facilitate their communication. It's deeply meaningful in their learning and allows them to connect the cognitive aspects, the affective aspects, but also through an aesthetic engagement. The idea of beautiful music, art that speaks to us and means something to us. So it has to be more than just playing a song. It has to go a bit further to allow us to engage with the arts-based text. Because I'm a researcher, I have to have this one slide, which is evidence-based benefits of arts-based pedagogy. And so for years, I've given you a citation here from Anderson and Chung, but there's lots and lots of research that shows that in children's learning, arts-based approaches really support intellectual, social, and emotional processes in learning. But for me, my research setting was with young adults and older adults in francisation in Quebec and in Ontario. So what I found really interesting is, we do lots of arts with kids. It's not unusual to see children going with their colored pencils and what have you to school, but somehow we give up on that as adults. And I think that's a real shame. Looking more closely at the question of immigration, there was Duckworth's study that showed that was in the UK, showing how arts-based pedagogies help to facilitate dialogue and build learner confidence. So this was specifically in a language learning setting. Another benefit, this one from Frimberger and their colleagues, is that it gives a chance for them to explore their shifting identities and build relationships, which is so important for my population, newcomers, immigrants, but also for young people. So I encourage any secondary teachers out there to think about this. And finally, Wilbur's study was done in Canada, and she was talking about how the arts-based approach really helped to lessen strength and help students focus in the classroom. So by the end of this, I was pretty much convinced that this was a good way to go for my study. And I did this project. I had funding from the Fonds de Recherche de Québec to do this project that had a French title, but basically it involved working with teachers in both English for immigrants in Ontario and Francisation groups in Quebec in order to see how an arts-based approach might have benefits for these groups. So the study had a couple of phases, but the stuff I'm going to show you today comes out of the classroom-based phase 2. So now's the part where I get to shift gears and start showing you what the teachers were doing. So this I find a really interesting example. This one's from Stephanie Paget, who was teaching English in Ottawa. And Stephanie's students, she had a student approach her concerned about a friend in the class regarding their mental health. Now, this, of course, mental health is at the forefront of what we do in education. It's a concern across the board, but in particular in newcomer classes where students could be facing histories of trauma and other challenges, mental health is a real issue and often comes with certain stigma attached to it. And so Stephanie wanted to find a way to talk about mental health, to open that conversation in a way that wasn't personal and didn't identify the student in question. And she decided to go with Van Gogh. And Van Gogh was an artist who struggled with mental health his entire life. Vincent van Gogh, it's quite a sad story. And so she invited the students to engage with his artwork, Starry Night, and also Don McLean's song, Starry, Starry Night. I'm not going to sing the whole thing. But I'll share the link if you want to hear it. It's a beautiful song, but it really explores the struggles and mental health issues that Vincent van Gogh experienced. And so for her, that was a way of opening the dialogue. And the students really empathized with the artist, and they were talking about how they could see it in his artwork. So it was a springboard. But what I found really interesting is that this then allowed Stephanie to move her students into exploring language as well. So what I want to say here is that it's not like arts are just this fluffy add-on. They're actually a way to engage language learning. And because the students were interested, they then looked at Van Gogh's piece, Bedroom in Arles, where they were looking at, and it's classic, right? Bedroom vocabulary and prepositions of position. So you have this really Grammarly type lesson emerging from an arts-based lesson. So it's doing a lot of things that pull on the social, the cognitive, the affective, but also concrete language learning goals. I want to show you another example that started with language learning goals. This one is a poetry-based, arts-based pedagogy. This is at Conestoga College in Kitchener in Southern Ontario. And in this case, Sonia and her students were writing haiku. Now, I don't know if you know haiku poetry, but it is extremely structured and you have to count the syllables to make your haiku poem work. So this was very much a linguistic exercise, having students sensitized to the rhythm of the language, to counting syllables. But then I'll just share with you one example of the kind of haiku that these newcomer students wrote. I love this. Walk towards sunshine. Can't see how far we have come only when looking back. It was a really beautiful way for them to engage with their feelings of migration coming to Canada. So it became an emotional way for them to express their experience of integrating into their new home. My next example is from Sonia's colleague Petra, and Petra worked with me a lot, Petra Middleton. Petra liked to work with storybooks, even though she had young adults in her class. And her favorite was the hockey sweater. Now, you might think, oh, it's kind of strange to use with older learners. But again, storybooks and picture books are incredibly powerful carriers of meaning with all of these evocative images. And it also allowed Petra to engage with cultural aspects. Again, understanding how to communicate culture, interpret culture, become a critical consumer of culture with students is part of the Quebec education program. Also popular in Ontario, where Petra was working. So Petra really inspired me and the research project. And these ones are not my pedagogy. I showed you things that the teachers were already doing. This is the one we developed in collaboration with the teachers around 2 texts. And the first text we used, the first arts-based text, was Sean Tan's The Arrival, pictured here. I don't know if you know this book. It's an extraordinary book. Unlike a graphic novel, this is actually a wordless narrative. There is not a single word except the title on the cover, The Arrival, in Sean Tan's book. And it tells the story of migration, and the main character pictured on the cover there, it shows chapter by chapter his process of integrating. So it was perfect material for our students who are newcomers to explore that. Other studies have actually used the same book in Europe, Arisby and Danzig, that I've cited on the slide there, but with younger learners in secondary. I was interested to see what happened in these francisation and in the ESL classes in Ontario. And we used the same book in francisation because there's no words besides the cover. There is actually a French translation, but it's just the cover is different. In French, it's called Là où vont nos pères, which is a strange translation of The Arrival, but there it is. The second text we did was a song, and here we had to have 2 different songs. In the English classrooms, we used Woody Guthrie's, originally written by Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land, and the English version that was done by the Travelers. You may know this folk song. This land is your land, this land is my land, from Buena Vista to Vancouver Island. And it finishes with, this land was made for you and me. And that's a very provocative question. Who is this land made for? You, me? Who do these pronouns refer to? So that was our point of departure. In Quebec, our francisation groups were looking at the song Gens du Pays, which also touches on themes of national belonging and who are gens du pays, are the newcomers gens du pays, and so forth. So what happened when we tried this out in the class? Oh, excuse me, I forgot. I have to remind you, we really wanted these to be aligned with curricular objectives in both contexts. So shout out and big thanks to Eva Marcolin and Joanie Thomason, who were our 4th year Beale students at the time, who worked with the teachers to develop these lessons. So working with the graphic book, Tan's graphic book, we started out drawing on that affective aesthetic engagement by just asking the students to look at the opening images of the book, where you see here they depict his arrival on a boat to this new city, and talking about the kinds of thoughts and emotions that come up looking at these images. We also, because of the rather surreal nature, you'll look at this, you see here the main character is being chased by this strange creature over a fence, different things happening. And so the imagery is a little surreal, and we wanted the students to be sensitized to that. So we started a little listening activity where there were descriptions and they had to just find the picture. So these were not advanced learners in English. We also wanted to support their understanding by reviewing job vocabulary. And so we had this little worksheet with images from the book where they identified these peculiar images with familiar job titles like musician, factory worker, cook, so on. And we did all that before we read chapter 4, which is the chapter where the main character looks for a job. Spoiler alert, he finds it very challenging because he has not mastered the local language. And ultimately, he ends up becoming a worker in this factory. Another thing we did with the book, on the opening cover pages, there are small portraits of various people. And so the writing activity associated with this was for them to create an imaginary character. And we invited them to sort of cut out from not from the book, but from a photocopy, one of these images, paste it onto their slide, and then imagine the perfect dream job for this person. So these were the activities that we did. Shifting over to the song, This Land Is Your Land, we started by discussing the meaning of the title. We listened to an instrumental version in order to, again, draw on emotions and feelings and the sound of the music. The teachers wanted a fairly traditional kind of question and answer, listen to the song and listen for particular things. So we did that. But what I want to draw your attention to is this last question where we asked them, who is the song addressed to? Everyone who likes Canada, young children, Canadian families, or Canadian immigrants. And of course, there was no correct answer really to number 5. It was for discussion. So we were able to kind of get at some of these more complex issues around national belonging. Newcomers also don't necessarily know a lot about Canada, so we had an activity where they listened and identified places on the map in order to become familiar with Canadian geography. We also invited them at the end to watch and listen to the song again, but watching a video that showed different scenes of Canada, and invited them to reflect on whether their ideas about Canada had shifted or changed from the initial instrumental listening. So we had different versions of the song that we used at various points. Last but not least, Petra really wanted to take this a little bit further, so she wrote a close exercise with a backstory of how it is that Woody Guthrie's song from the US managed to migrate into Canada and become a Canadian version. And so they did this close exercise to learn more about the origin of the song. Again, great cultural content. And we returned again to some questions with their partner that asked them to think about who the audience was, how it shifted from the American version to the Canadian version. So you can see that the arts-based materials allow for both an intellectual, an aesthetic, and an affective engagement. Now, was it all perfect? Absolutely not. We came up against some challenges, and maybe you're already sitting there thinking, this would never work in my context. What were some of the challenges we came up against? There were a lot. One I want to share from Petra's classroom. Petra was pretty nervous about reading or I say reading, the Sean Tan's The Arrival, particularly chapter 4, where the man has a hard time finding work and ultimately ends up in this factory setting because she was worried it was going to trigger negative feelings for her students. And certainly art can do that. Not all art makes us happy, right? Some art can be very evocative and bring out difficult emotions. She also knew some of her students were working in a factory setting. There's lots of car manufacturing in Southern Ontario. So here's Petra, and she also asked them, ultimately, do you think that the character's experience is typical of new immigrants? Why or why not? And this was really, really important because what it allowed us to do was really to not just take the story and the art at face value, but to offer what might be called counter narratives, other ways of understanding their experiences in relation to the text. And it caused one of the students to bring up this particular sign. This is actually put out by the Mennonites. You can buy this sign online. It's called Welcome Your Neighbor. And it's a peace initiative. And apparently at the time in Kitchener, these were on lawns all over the place. And so the students were saying, yes, you know, it's challenging in Canada at times, but other times we feel very welcome. We feel like it's easier because of things like this. And they were talking about how this was part of their lived experience in Kitchener. So you can see how the art takes us beyond the text and into our own life experiences. And certainly the song, when we asked them to compare from the beginning through to the end, revealed a bit of an emotional roller coaster. And there were moments that were challenging, but the trick was that Petra had a really good trusting relationship with her students, and she was able to welcome all of those perspectives in the classroom. Just before I wrap up, I wanted to also share two, I don't know if these are challenges, but unexpected things that happened. And this one's actually from a francisation or FSL class that was in Montreal. We did a similar activity. We had not your imaginary life character, but the vie imaginaire. And we again offered the images for them to choose a character to write about. And it didn't go well at all. The teacher said, oh, they're not used to thinking like this. They're not used to being creative. And in a way that was kind of tragic that to me, that we should get out of practice of being creative. We only know how to fill in blanks. And so when the students did it, what the teacher discovered is that they were actually writing their own story and just pretending it was fake. So she was asking them if their character resembled them. And they were like, oh, yeah, that kind of resembles me a little bit. But she told me they were basically writing their own stories. We also invited them optionally to draw, and none of them in this context did. So I was kind of feeling like it was a bit of a flop. But, but then something really interesting happened around this little character right here. And we had pitched this as imaginary people, these little portraits that Sean Tan had created. And one of the students in the class complained, telling us, no, it's not imaginary. That's actually a Russian poet. Oddly enough, the student was of Russian extraction. And she pulled out her smartphone and immediately looked up this poet. In fact, she was thinking of the playwright Anton Chekhov. There is a striking resemblance. And so you can see the teacher and I in this shot where we were kind of completely derailed. And this student took over the class with her smartphone and basically gave us a quick literary lesson, a lesson on Russian arts and culture. But it was a really great moment because it allowed her to shine, share what she knew. Other students helped her express her ideas. She supported herself using the technology that she had. So again, not planned, but the arts opened a really interesting pedagogical moment. And last but not least, another surprise, this time from a class in Toronto, an ESL class, same activity, the imaginary life. And in this class, the teacher told me, oh, no, this was a beginner class. She said, they can't do this. They're never going to be able to do this. I said, well, maybe they can write a word or two on the paper. And she said, I don't know. But she decided to give it a whirl anyway. And something really interesting happened. In her classroom, she had baskets of school supplies, for lack of a better term, extra pens, pencils, scissors, and glue sticks. And they always live on the desks in little baskets. And without us asking them to, instead of drawing the family optionally in the space below, they started cutting out all kinds of the little people and gluing them on and building family trees for their imaginary character and labeling all of the different family members, mother, father, and so on and so forth. So they didn't do the descriptive writing we had anticipated, but the teacher, and I had to put her quote up here, was completely blown away. She said, I was going to tell them it's okay. It's optional. It's okay. But I was surprised. They were writing and everything. They enjoyed it. So this really stood out for me. And that gave me the encouragement that we can do so much more. So it was, again, a surprise to us the way the students engaged with this, but given the opportunity to create a collage spontaneously, they were really into it. So to wrap up, to do or not to do arts-based pedagogy, that's the question you might be asking yourself. Certainly, it's a little challenging because art can surprise and often evokes emotional responses. So that's something that you have to be aware of as a teacher and feel comfortable managing. Also, your own responses as well. In the case of Shantan, of course, art can be a bit abstract, ambiguous. What does it really mean? But the idea is that you have to support the learners in risk-taking, providing them the vocabulary, the functional language they need to express themselves. Another thing that we had to be really cautious of are how things are represented, that there aren't stereotypes represented. In our case, some sort of essentialized depiction of the migrant experience and the arrival. And so that was really handled nicely by Petra by presenting counter narratives and inviting different interpretations of the same text. And of course, in our case, bringing up personal experiences that might be difficult or even traumatic was a concern. So one of the things we really try to do is to depersonalize and try to stay at a general discussion like Stephanie did with her mental health issues. They talked about Van Gogh. They didn't talk about themselves. So that was another tip we found really useful. Overall, is it possible or impossible? It seemed like a success. It really allowed the participants to express their feelings about complex issues. It still met curriculum objectives of practicing various language skills in an integrated approach and grammar in a meaningful context. And of course, the cultural elements were present throughout. And culture is a huge part of what we have integrated into our curriculum in Quebec. So I'm going to conclude there. I'd be curious as we enter the discussion portion if your viewpoint has changed, if you've been maybe inspired to experiment, if you still have some reservations, and maybe to share some of your own success stories. For those of you that are interested in the bibliography, if there's any of these citations that are extremely tiny that you would like to explore further, don't hesitate to email me. I'd be happy to share it with you. And I just hot off the presses, well, actually it's been almost a year, but that shows you what kind of year I've had. This particular new teacher resource has been published in June of 2022, Creating Welcoming Learning Environments Using Creative Arts Methods in Language Classrooms. So I'm really excited to check that out and add it to the bibliography, but I just wanted to flag it for you. So back to your thoughts, and I'll stop my share there so we can invite questions and comments. Oh, thanks for the virtual clap.
Thank you so much, Monica. Yeah, so absolutely. So there weren't any questions specifically that were written in the chat. I do want to point out that I put in the link for that document you showed us at the beginning.
Thank you so
And I did
much.
put in, yeah, of course, it's what I'm here for. I put in the link for the For Real website, okay, for those of you who don't know it. And then I found a link on YouTube for that song you were talking about, if anyone's
Oh, thanks.
interested. Yeah, thought somebody might be interested. So basically at this point, you know, people can either raise a digital hand, or honestly, there's not so many of us if you just want to speak up. But it's, you know, it's not strictly regimented. So please just feel free to share from this point moving forward.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear how you've worked with this kind of thing. It was a really fun project to do with the teachers. They were so brave.
I would just jump in because I just love the project. It's so great. As an immigrant myself, I wish that I had that experience.
Mm,
I think it is so important that you link language learning to something that is important to them, not just cognitively, because they need to learn language, but emotionally, that relates to their lived experience. I think that is so important. And
mm,
I have chills as I was listening to you, because I think not only you showed us such a great theme, but how you did it with how language is being linked and being taught in such a meaningful way. I think that is so important. I've used the arrival with students, like with my teacher participants, but I never use it in such a structured way. And I really love the exercise that has been created. That's wonderful. And
thanks, Sunny.
I wonder if we can look at those resources. Is there it was were they published or anywhere?
Yeah, they're not published officially, but what we did as a team is that we created a shared Google Drive in which we put all of the materials that we used. I think we have haven't looked at it for a bit. I think we have a separate one for the ESL materials and one for the FSL materials, but I think I could still share that Google Drive link if anyone's interested. They could email me and I could certainly do that. I'll make my best effort to do that. It's
That would
on
be
the do list, right? To put that stuff together, but time. It's interesting you would say it's so structured, because I went in feeling a little more artsy fartsy, but then, you know, it's a little bit different. Well, no, maybe it's not that much more different. Those of you like in Sec 5 and you've got ministry exams looming, when you're working in Francisation or you're working in ESL with adults in Ontario, there's a huge push towards survival English, right? And survival French. And they have to know this so they can get a job and just kind of function in society. So it was kind of a tough sell. It sounded like fluffy, and they were like, I don't think we have time to do that. So there was a really interesting negotiation as we tried to develop things that really fit with the curricular objectives that the teachers wanted to meet, but also open spaces for conversation and creativity as well.
Can I just jump in and say thank you, Monica, for
Oh,
such a
thanks,
great presentation? I think one of the things I really loved is that you started off with arts-based education and really talking about it, but then it just seemed to go in so many different directions and pull in different pieces from all over the place. You know, literature and art and music and yeah, I have a lot to think about. I hadn't thought about pulling it into the title arts-based education. I'm one of those people that, like you, can only draw stick figures. So I've always been like, ah.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that, yeah, actually, it's a real comfort to know that we actually already are doing that in some ways. And that gives us the confidence, I think, to maybe branch out and try some more. So I really loved the examples that you gave. Thank you for that.
Oh, thanks. And I should say, I didn't include it, but one of my Francisation participants, he was an amazing guitar player. So when he did Jean du Pays, he actually played for his students and they sang together. And that was really lovely. And that was a fun context too, because I was speaking in French in the francisation class, and the students were like, wow, you're terrible in French too. And I'm like, yes, thank you very much. So that was quite nice too. The researcher had some street cred in the francisation class. Hey, Bianca.
Hi. I just wanted to say I really love that there's such a wide variety of things that you can do in art-based pedagogy. Like it's not just drawing or songs. Like there's a lot that you can do. And I really like that there were like you layered all of the activities a lot. Like with one book you did so much, or with the song you did so much. And even between the song and the book, you could probably do a comparison between the two. And I don't know if you did that.
I think we kind of did it in 2 weeks. So we had like a series of lessons around the book in 1 week, and then the next week we did the song. But certainly the thematics, the themes addressed were coming back again and again. So we didn't make direct links, but they were kind of implicitly there. And of course, you can do any thematic that's interesting to you. Like Stephanie's group was working on mental health, and these different kinds of things that fit with the objectives and interests of your students are great. I don't know if you, another really fun one is, and I've never tried it, but sculpture. And you can do like tinfoil sculpture. It's super easy and cheap. And that's kind of a fun way to get into sculpture too. Anyway, what were you going to say, Bianca?
Oh, I really like the fact that there weren't any words in the book, because it really gives the students the chance to like tell their own story using the pictures basically, or tell a version. Yeah. Anyways,
Absolutely.
I really liked your presentation.
Oh, thanks. And I have to say, I mentioned that Catherine Winkler, one of my students, really inspired me with her artistic side. But it was again another student who brought the arrival to my attention many years ago, and it took me a while to build this project around it. But I remember when they showed it to me, and I wish I could sort of just show you the whole book right now, but I can't. But it's such a page turner, like an incredible page turner. And I took it home and I was reading it on the bus, and people were hovering around me looking at the book. And then I got home and my niece and nephew came over and they were like crying because they had to go home before the book was done. And I thought, oh, I have to use this. I have to use this in my newcomer classes somehow, some way, someday.
Is
And
it
that
a
it was
very long book?
It is quite long, but it's in chapters. So as I said, we spent a lot of time with that particular group on chapter 4, which is where he looks for employment. But the book sort of starts out with first his arrival in his new home. So there's lots of like, how do I take the bus? How do I get, somewhere? I think the next chapter he's looking for food. What does food look like in this place? I don't know how many of you have traveled to a new place, but that's often like, I don't even understand what this thing is. Is it breakfast food or what? So he goes through that, trying to find work. Well, I don't want to spoil that. He makes friends, he meets people, and so on and so forth. It does have a happy ending. I guess I'll give you a spoiler alert. But one of the critiques, which was very interesting from some of the learners, was that it's not that neat and tidy. It doesn't always work out that way. So again, pushing back against the story a little bit.
If you go on YouTube, you can find the animated version also.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, and some people, they also put music to the text also.
Here, I just see I'm going to put my email in the chat. Monica Waterhouse at lli.ulaval.ca. I think I've got that right. Yeah. And if you Google me, you'll probably find the university website with my email there too. So. I have to say, thank the audience for being here and being so engaged, especially at the end of term. It's been a long haul, and I know some of my U Laval students are still in it with our slightly extended terms. So I really appreciate you coming out tonight or this afternoon.
Karina mentioned in the chat that she really liked the fact that art-based includes music and films, because when she was in school, they didn't really have lessons involving songs and films, but her friends and herself used music to supplement their learning.
Oh, wow, interesting. And of course, if we think about multiple intelligences or different learning styles, if you like, I mean, we all plug in differently, right? So there are a large number of people who really resonate with arts-based methods, and that is going to be the way that they access their language learning. So I wouldn't say, you only do arts-based, but having it there as an element of your pedagogy is super important, I think, to plug into students that like to learn that way. I've been on projects before too where we did photography, photo stories, and so art can be really broadly interpreted. And with kids, maybe you're battling with your students, like to get them to put their smartphones down, put them to work with their smartphones doing something more productive by taking pictures to create photo story. It's an interesting strategy to use. Let's work with them instead of against them.
Well, I just had one observation. When you were singing This Land Is Our Land, you said from somewhere to New Brunswick, and I always heard it from California to New York Island. And so now I'm terribly curious why that's the version I know.
What's that? Yeah, so the backstory on the song, and again, this came from yeah, many years ago I was in a classroom and the teacher was singing this song, right? And it had actions in the whole bit, like there was like a watery bit, and I forget how it went now. But it's kind of contentious. It started out as kind of in the Depression. Woody Guthrie wrote this in the U.S., and it was really meant to be kind of a Marxist power to the people kind of song, like to say this country is ours and you may be starving and your families are starving. It's not right. So it was a really political song. But it was in the 60s that it got appropriated by the Travelers, Canadian folk band, and they changed it from California to so okay, now wait, I have to do the whole song or I can't remember. From the Arctic Circle to this land was made. So the West Coast, the East Coast, the Arctic Circle, the Great Lakes, and they just sort of switched it up. And then it just became kind of a patriotic kind of song, more so than the original political oomph. And interestingly, Jean Dupéy has a similar backstory. It was really in the moment of the separatist movement that it was written. And now you hear people singing it at birthday parties. What is happening to this song, right? So it was really an interesting cultural exploration on both sides in the Francisation and the ESL groups.
So I guess me think, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so like, when we look at art pieces, it's not just the art piece and what it does for us, but then the whole backstory behind it is really interesting too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. It just made me think like then you could do it with any country, right? So somebody could take their own country and then put their own landmarks, and now they can work in their own. So it'd just be funny. But anyway, that's it. Sorry. You just got me thinking of what you said, and then I went with it. So
well, that could be a good exercise. Yeah.
Right? So it's like take your country and now what cities would you put or whatever. Anyway, that's the point.
And I was pretty blown away by Petra's students because they, I was really thinking about this in terms of, this land is my land, your land, thinking about their positioning as newcomers. But it also broadened because some of them opened the dialogue around Indigenous rights. And so some of the newcomer students are very preoccupied with their place in reconciliation and what does that look like as we try to move into a new kind of relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada between Indigenous and settler populations. So I was I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. They were very well informed, very interested, engaged students. So they brought that up in that context as well. Oh, thanks, Trevor. I got to check that out. I'm clicking the link. Okay, don't start playing. I just want to stop it and then I'll look at it after.
It's an interesting, even more political version, talking about this. They came across a sign that says private property, and they decided to keep going because this land was made for you and me. So it's
there you are.
it takes it one
Thanks.
step further.
Thank you for the share. And then again, you see this sort of interesting thing with songs and remakes where you can look at sort of the evolution of a song and what purposes is it used for. So you can, but I mean, we have to be a bit cautious too, because in an arts-based pedagogy, you don't want to like suck the life out of an art piece because we should have an aesthetic relationship to it as well. It can't just be a purely intellectual endeavor. So I think there's an important balance to be found there when we engage with the arts. Oh, I can't wait to look. Let's finish so I can go look at this. No, just kidding.
Well, we are coming to a close, though. It is 4:57. So is there any remaining person who'd like to, got 3 minutes here, comment, question?
Well, I thank you so much, Monica. And I just want to say, I put on the chat for next for real. It's going to be about video games and ESL teaching and learning.
Right on. And that'll be the first Tuesday, June 6th, right on.
Yes. So make sure you tune in.
Absolutely. We'll be on the other side of Congress.
There is, if you're not already on the email list, please put your email in the chat and we will make sure that you receive a reminder that about the next webinar. So if you're not already on the list, put your email in the chat and we'll make sure you are reminded.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lindsay, for being our hostess with the mostess.
Anytime.
Oh, Kevin's got a question, I think.
All right, Kevin.
My question is more for after, if you have some time, like just a quick question, Monica, for something more personal. If you have time.
Okay. You know what, Kevin? We'll close down this meeting, which is one of Bishop's team meetings, and perhaps you could give me. Would it be okay if you gave me a telephone call at my office?
Yeah, sure. If you
I'll put it in the.
Leaving the number, yeah.
No, it's okay. It's a public number here at the office.
Good.
What is my number? 418. Oh, wait. I have to put it in the chat. This is so funny. Telephones. It's like an ancient technology. What do you do with that? How do you call someone? Hang on. So sorry. Okay, it's 656-2131. And then you have to call the extension, which is 407995. That's me.
Good. Perfect.
And on that note, thank you very much, Monica.
Thanks
for everything.
A lot, everybody.
Thank you, everyone who came. So a final round of applause, perhaps. And we hope to see you next month at the next webinar.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sunny, I'm just going to remind you to turn off the recording.
Yes. Stop. Okay.